All right. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. It's good to see everyone. Good to have visitors with us this morning. A good friend of Jesus was dying. Lazarus lived with his two sisters, Mary and Martha, in the village of Bethany, very near Jerusalem, where Jesus had recently had an encounter with the Jewish leaders, an encounter in which they tried to kill him. And so he had moved on from Jerusalem to a safer place. And now Mary and Martha sent word to him that his good friend was sick, that he needed to come, essentially. And so, because he loved Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Wait a minute, that can't be right. Yeah. Now, Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to the disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." Not exactly what you would expect, right? Because he loved them so much, he waited around a couple more days and then went. Yeah. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But he did go. He did go. He returned to Judea where he would face death in order to be with this family. Well, of course, because he waited, Lazarus was dead when he got there. And the two sisters, Mary and Martha, let him know. They approached him in different ways at different times, but they both greeted him with the same thing. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." Let's read this conversation that Jesus had with Martha. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." "Your brother will rise again," Jesus told her. Martha said, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, ever. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world." I'm going to come back to this conversation and look at the whole conversation in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to focus on the statement Jesus made in verse 25, where he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." I want to take that statement and kind of put it into the context of the book of John. Okay? And I'm going to start with the last word of that sentence, life. Life is one of the main themes in the book of John. It starts out in verse 4 of chapter 1. Almost the beginning. Begins in the beginning, right? Verse 4, life was in him, speaking of Jesus. Life was in him, and that life was the light of men. All right, so that's how it starts. You can, I like to think of John as being divided into 3 parts. Okay? First 12 chapters deal with his public ministry. Chapters 13 through 20 deal with his death, burial, and resurrection, including, in fact, more than half of that is at the time that he spent with his disciples the night that he was betrayed. And then the last chapter, chapter 21, is an epilogue. I'll come back to why in just a minute. But at the end of that second part, how does that second part conclude? Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name. Okay? Basically, it's at the end of the second part of John, just like it's the beginning of the first part of the book. And again, the reason why I'm treating chapter 21 as an epilogue, this passage that I just read, that's a conclusion. Right? I mean, basically he's wrapping things up here and telling why he's written everything. And then there's another chapter. And because of that, there are a lot of people who believe that John actually added that chapter a little bit later. That this was the original end of the gospel, and then he added chapter 21 a little later. Whether that's true or not, it does really read as an epilogue to the gospel. Now, so we see these two main parts. Jesus' public ministry, his death, burial, and resurrection. What about the transition in between? Right at the end of chapter 12. For I have not spoken on my own. This is Jesus speaking here. For I have not spoken on my own, but the Father himself who sent me has given me a command as to what I should say and what I should speak. I know that his command is eternal life. So the things that I speak just as the Father has told me. Okay? That's how the second part ends. We see it appearing these three places, but it's not just those three places. Jesus, in this statement, I am the resurrection and the life, that is one of 7 I am statements that Jesus gives throughout this gospel. Okay? It's the 5th of the 7. 6 of those 7 he directly connects to life. Let me show you. I am the bread of life. Okay? Jesus spoke to them again. I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. So Jesus said again, I assure you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. 4th statement. I am the good shepherd. He mentions that twice early on in John chapter 10. And in that same context, later in the chapter, he says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, ever. And then the one that we're focusing on today, I am the resurrection and the life. And the 6th one, Jesus told them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it's kind of interesting to me, the last one, the only one that he doesn't really explicitly connect with life, would have been easy to do. I mean, I am the true vine. How easy would it have been for him to say that the branches that are in the vine get life from the vine? He didn't say that, though, so I'm not going to put words in his mouth. 6 out of the 7 are directly connected to life. All right? And that just really scratches the surface. All right? Book of John, as much as just about anything, is about life. I am the resurrection and the life. What about the resurrection? Well, Jesus demonstrated this by raising Lazarus from the dead. This is the 7th of 7 signs that Jesus gives. And being the 7th of these signs, it really is the climax of the first part of the gospel. Much as his own resurrection is the climax of the second part of the gospel. But I wonder, why are 2 resurrections needed? John gives 7 signs, right? And then at the end, Jesus raises himself from the dead. That's not really included in as one of the 7 signs, but yet there is another resurrection as the 7th of the 7 signs. And I wonder, what is communicated or demonstrated in the resurrection of Lazarus that wasn't also communicated or demonstrated in the resurrection of Jesus? Well, I can think of some things. First of all, in the flow of John really gives this sign, the resurrection of Lazarus, as the tipping point that leads the Jewish leaders to seek Jesus' death, and thereby transitions into the second part of the gospel that focuses more on his death, burial, and resurrection. And so it's important from the perspective of the flow of the narrative. But I don't think that really gets to the heart of the importance of this sign within the book of John. There's also something to be learned about when God disappoints us. Okay? I want to be really careful here, because some of us have lost loved ones and not received them back the way Mary and Martha did. And in some cases, it's traumatic. It makes us wonder sometimes, why didn't God do something? Just like Mary and Martha were wondering. I want to be sensitive to that, because while Mary and Martha did get their brother Lazarus back, that's not the normal thing that happens, is it? Okay? We lose someone, to expect them to come back 4 days later, well, that's not healthy. It's not something that we ought to be expecting, really. But what I think this does teach us is that even in these traumatic times where we don't understand why God doesn't do something, or we don't understand what God is doing, and we're wondering, does God even love me? This shows that God does love us. That even in these times when we can't even comprehend what He might be doing, He still is working in love for us. I think this story gives us some encouragement in that. But still, I don't think that's really at the heart of why this sign is included, what its significance is in John's Gospel. In order to really dig down and get to the heart of that, I think we need to look a little more carefully at some of the details that John provides us. The first one we've already mentioned. When he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. Okay? And we wondered a little bit why he stayed those 2 days. Keep that in mind as we consider that when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now I'm doing the math here. If Jesus had left immediately, he got there after Lazarus had been dead 2 days. Right? Now, what I'm getting at here doesn't have anything to do with could he have saved Lazarus from dying. Doesn't have anything to do with that. If he had wanted to prevent Lazarus from dying, he'd have found a way to do that. Okay? He could have done that. What I'm getting at here is, why is it important that Lazarus had been dead 4 days as opposed to 2 days? And it is an important detail, I think, because John mentions it twice. Okay? Do you remember what Martha said when Jesus told them to roll back the stone? As the King James puts it, Lord, by this time he stinketh. I don't usually quote the King James, but I couldn't resist it this time. Yeah. There's an odor. There's a smell by this time. Why is that important? Well, let's keep going. After Jesus called him from the tomb, the dead man came out, bound, hand and foot, with linen strips, and his face... let me read that a little bit better. All right? The dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips, and with his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." Okay? Keep all this in mind. And consider alongside this Jesus' emotions at this time. John really emphasizes the emotions that Jesus is going through. I'm not going to read you all of it, but for example, in verse 33, when Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was angry in his spirit and deeply moved. That word angry might have caught your attention if you're familiar at all with this passage, because we usually don't use this version that I'm reading from here, the Holman Christian Standard. And that's kind of an unusual way of translating it. Okay? The footnote in this translation says that the Greek word suggests a strong emotion. Okay? And I find that footnote helpful because I don't even understand modern Greek, let alone Koine Greek from 2,000 years ago. Okay? And so basically I have to rely on those who have spent their careers dedicated to understanding that language of that time. People like those who have translated the various English versions that we have. And they chose in this particular translation to use the word angry, indicating that it is a strong emotion that is being described here. Other translations might say deeply troubled or deeply disturbed. One translation had in a footnote indignant. Okay? A strong emotion of some sort. I mean, angry might not be the best translation. I'm trying to give you a broad picture of how different people have translated this strong emotion. Okay? But in looking at all of these details of how Jesus was feeling, I'm getting the sense that Lazarus was not the only stinking corpse here. And that Jesus was fed up with it all. There are people here in this story. There are people here in this story who are dead, stinking dead, as a result of sin. Sin that binds and blinds, as Lazarus was bound and his face covered. Let's go back to that conversation that Jesus had with Martha. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet, even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." It sounds kind of like she still thinks that Jesus might bring Lazarus back. I think that's a misunderstanding. If you look at the entire conversation, she doesn't have a clue that that's what's going to happen. Okay? What she's doing here is expressing her faith in Jesus. I still believe in you, even though you didn't save my brother. Okay? Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. And of course, he knows what he's going to do. She doesn't. Martha said, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. That's something that we can look forward to. And it's part of what Jesus' own resurrection communicates to us, right? He has victory over sin and death. And it gives us promise of this future resurrection. But that's not what Jesus has in mind here. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, ever. Jesus is that resurrection. We don't have to wait for this future resurrection. Jesus is the resurrection now. He is the one who can give life to our stinking dead bodies. He is the one who can save us from the sin that kills us. And we can live with Him. We can live in God's love forever. From now on, forever. This is what I see as Jesus trying to communicate through this statement, I am the resurrection and the life, and the sign in raising Lazarus from the dead. And so I ask, do you have this life? Or are you still dead in your sin? Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And you can have that. He's offering it to you. If we can help you this morning to come to Jesus, we can baptize you, uniting you with Him in His death, burial in the water, symbolizing His burial, and His resurrection, being raised to a new life. If you want to be baptized or have any other need, please come as we stand together and sing.